Welcome back. Today we're going to cover Chapter 9, Lifespan Development. It used to be called Developmental Psychology, Conception to Death. Lifespan Development studies how you change as well as how you remain the same over the course of your life. It's how you develop physically, psychosocially, and cognitively from birth to death. The physical includes things like your height, your weight, your fine and gross motor skills, brain development, puberty, sexual health, fertility, and menopause. Changes in your senses, as well as primary and secondary aging. This can include topics such as language development, logical thinking, abstract reasoning, learning and understanding, memory abilities, moral reasoning, practical intelligence, as well as wisdom. The last domain is psychosocial. It includes things like psychological and social development, temperament and attachment, emotions, personality, self-esteem, relationships, identity development, dating, romance, cohabitation, marriage, and having children. It also includes finding work or a career, caregiving, retirement, and coping with losses and death and dying. Theories of development include continuous versus discontinuous development. Continuous development is like a cumulative process. You're gradually improving on existing skills. There are a number of skills or forms of development that are continuous, improving on a skill over time. Most of the theories are discontinuous. Discontinuous is happening in unique stages. So once you get through stage 1, then you'll move on to stage 2, and so on and so forth. Is there one course of development, or are there many courses? Is development essentially the same for all? Development is universal as well as stages. There are certain forms of development that you know will span across the entire world. There are physiological developments that can happen no matter what. This includes the onset of puberty, for example. Many courses of development have been very popular depending on where you grow up in the world. That can really influence your development due to environment, culture, specific genetics. Development follows a different course for each child. Another topic to discuss is nature versus nurture. Nature is strictly talking about somebody's biology and their genetics, what they are given at birth by their biological parents. Nurture is the environment in which you grow up in, as well as your culture, where you grow up in the world. This can include things like your parents, as well as your peers, your teachers, etc. It should be viewed as an interactionist model. Both nature and nurture are involved, both your genes and your environment. They shape who you become and how you behave. There are different theories of development. They include the psychosexual, psychosocial, cognitive, and theory of moral development. Psychosexual theory was discovered by Freud. You may have learned a lot about Freud in Psych 101 would be my guess. So I'm going to be brief as we go over this. But he believed that childhood experiences shape our personalities and behaviors as adults. He developed the stages of psychosexual development, which include the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. So within these stages, he would analyze children and Freud broke these down into oral, which is 0 to 18 months, anal, which is 18 to 3 years, phallic, which is 3 to 6 years of age, latency, which is 6 to puberty, which is roughly 12 years of age, and then genital is puberty to adulthood. And oral is being fixated with putting things in your mouth. Anal is being obsessed with elimination, bowel or urine. Phallic, he felt that this was a stage where a child will start exploring their own bodies. Latency would be a dormant stage, he would say, where they aren't concerned about their genital area and they're focusing more on friendships and school and things like that. And then genital, he said, was a reawakening where they are discovering their own sexuality again. Unlike Freud, Erikson focused on the social nature of development. He argued that personality development takes place across the lifespan, not just in childhood. So that's also different from Freud, based on his belief that social interactions affect our sense of self, which is our ego identity. The ego is the mediator. If you recall, the id is the pleasure part of your identity, and your superego is the moral side of your identity, and the ego is the mediator. And then he had 8 stages of the psychosocial task that he felt you must master, and you can't go on to the next stage until you've mastered the first. So the first is trust versus mistrust. The second is autonomy versus shame and doubt. The third is initiative versus guilt. Industry versus inferiority. Identity versus confusion. Intimacy versus isolation. Generativity versus stagnation, and then integrity versus despair. And you can see that the ages that correspond. So he would say, for example, that you need to go through these 4-5 stages here in order to be ready and prepared for an intimate relationship, whether that's with a loved one, a significant other, but just to have an intimate relationship in general. Piaget focused on children's cognitive growth and theorized that cognitive abilities develop through specific stages. He came up with the coins of assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation example would be if a baby was breastfeeding and the mom needed to incorporate a bottle, that would be assimilation. So it's something very similar. The baby still sucks and gets liquid out, gets nourishment out, but it's not exactly like the mom's breast. Accommodation would be taking it a step further and introducing a pacifier, binky, chupete, whatever you call it, into the baby. You know, maybe the baby's fussy, even though he or she just ate. And so now introducing the pacifier, they've accommodated because now they're sucking, but they're not getting anything out. Piaget's stages were sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. Kohlberg's moral development was pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And you can see the different stages here. So stage 1 and 2 go with pre-conventional, 3, 4 conventional, and 5 and 6 go with post-conventional. Kohlberg identified 3 levels of moral reasoning, and each level is associated with increasingly complex stages of moral development. So doing things because you're worried about getting in trouble, doing things because it's right or wrong, or doing things because intrinsically it's just what's going to make you've decided it's going to make you feel good about your decision. So it's internal moral principles. The different stages of development are prenatal, infancy through childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood, and adulthood. The prenatal development starts with the germinal stage, the embryonic stage, the fetal stage, influences, so things that affect the baby prenatally, so when it's in the mom's belly, are many things that are good for the baby and things that are harmful. So some of the things that are harmful are called teratogens, and they include alcohol, smoking, drugs, radiation, viruses, certain raw foods are another example. Fetal alcohol syndrome is a condition where the mother drinks during pregnancy and can result in some physical and cognitive development issues. Here's an example of some of the physical attributes that can be present with a child that's born with fetal alcohol syndrome. Newborns are born with reflexes, which are inborn automatic responses to particular forms of stimulation. The rooting reflex is when they're searching for their mom's breast, for the nipples to get the milk. The sucking reflex, you probably felt that if you have your hands anywhere near a baby, they'll start sucking on them. The grasping, same thing. If you have your hand nearby, they'll grasp onto your finger. Moro reflex is when you put them on your hand and their arms and legs go straight out. Not all of their sensory abilities are developed at birth. Vision, for example, takes a while for their vision to be able to be processed fully with both eyes being able to focus at once. They prefer human voices, specifically their mom, and they can distinguish their mom's scent from other people's scent. The physical development, it occurs greatly in the first year. The nervous system, there's a blooming period and a pruning period. The blooming period is the neural pathways from thousands of new connections during infancy and toddlerhood, and that happens a lot during the first year. The pruning is the neural connections are reduced during childhood and adolescence to allow the brain to function more efficiently. So as they get into school, the neural connections are reduced to account for that, for them to be able to learn new skills. Their motor skills develop as they get older as well. Fine motor skills are the small muscles in your fingers, your toes, your eyes. And the gross motor skills are things that the larger muscles that help them to run, to ride a bike, pump a swing. Cognitive development, again, talking about Piaget, he thought the ability to understand objects develops slowly as a child matures and interacts with the environment. Today, developmental psychologists have another idea. Balargian in '87 felt that very young children understood objects and how they work long before they have experience with those objects. Cognitive development from 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12, 8 months, toddlers, 3 to 5, 6 to 11 years. It's the different ways that you can observe that they are developing cognitively. So they're starting to be able to think. You can see their thoughts in their behaviors and it develops greatly as they get older. Psychosocial development has to do with attachment. So, how is a child with the parent corresponding to the stage that they're at? Attachment's a long-standing connection or bond with others, and it's important to form healthy attachments in order to go through the different psychosocial milestones. Henry Harlow had an experiment with monkeys. He had a baby monkey and he had a mom that was not a monkey, but it had milk. And then he had another mom that was not a monkey that was more soft, was more cuddly, but did not have the milk. And the baby monkey preferred the mom that was cozy, that comfy, that could cuddle with the baby monkey versus the monkey mom that had the milk. So it shows how important bonding is. Bowlby's attachment theory defined attachment as the affectional bond or tie that an infant forms with a mother. It needs to be formed with the primary caregiver in order to have normal social and emotional development. He felt that attachment was an all or nothing process. So you use the mom as a secure base. Caregiver had to be responsive to the child's physical, social, and emotional needs. The caregiver and child must engage in mutually enjoyable interactions. So those are the things that are needed for a healthy attachment, according to Bowlby. Mary Ainsworth wondered if children differed in the way that they bonded. So she had an experiment where she had the caregiver come in a room with a child and there was toys. So the caregiver would introduce the child to the toys and kind of let them get comfortable and then would leave the room. And then a stranger would come into the room and try to play with the child or kind of be near the child. And then a few minutes later, the mom would return to the room and would comfort the child. And depending on how the child reacted, Mary Ainsworth assigned these different types of attachment styles. She said a secure child used the parent as a secure base, so they would go explore. They wouldn't be that concerned if mom left, and they'd be happy when mom returned. Avoidant, they wouldn't respond to the parent. They wouldn't use the parent as a secure base and acted as if they didn't care if the mom left. When mom returned or caregiver returned, the child was not quick to show any positive reaction or return to mom. Resistant would show clingy behavior, so would be very clingy, but then reject the mom when the mom tried or caregiver tried to interact with them. That child would not explore the different toys, would be very angry when the mom left, and would be hard to comfort. And the disorganized would show odd behavior around the caregiver, would do strange things when the caregiver left, and would try to run away when the mom returned. Self-concept is similar to self-awareness. A child with a positive self-concept would be more confident, more independent, would be more willing to try new things. At 18 months, they recognize themselves in the mirror. 24 to 46 months, they would recognize themselves in a photo. Self-concept and social behavior would be moving on to ages 2 to 4. And they would enjoy playing with other children. Age 4 can cooperate and share. Age 6 can identify themselves as far as a group, belonging to a group. Parenting styles, Baumrind in 1971 is authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved. Authoritative is a parent that has typical limits and boundaries, but they're warm with the child. Authoritarian is more my way or the highway. Permissive would have very little limits and boundaries. Child is able to kind of do what they want. Uninvolved are indifferent, uninvolved. It could even get to neglectful. I guess I should point out here that authoritative would be the type that you'd want to aim for at least most of the time. Psychosocial development, the parenting style also could depend on the temperament of a child, which is the innate traits that influence how one thinks, behaves, and reacts to their environment. An easy temperament would be positive emotions, adapt well to change, and they're capable of regulating their emotions. An easy child is going to elicit a warm and responsive parenting style. A difficult temperament would be a negative emotion, difficult to adapt to change, and difficulty regulating emotions. This can create a more difficult bond between the child and the parent if it's an ongoing issue of having a difficult temperament. So the parent's doing the best they can. Moving on to adolescence, which includes puberty. Maturing of the adrenal glands is the adrenarche. Gonadarche is the maturing of the sex glands. The secondary sex characteristics are breast and hips in girls, and facial hair and deepened voice in boys. Menarche is the beginning of menstrual period, usually around 12 or 13 age. And spermarche for boys, first ejaculation around 13 to 14 years old. It also includes growth spurts. Adult height is generally around 16 for girls and 17 for boys, but that can vary. Physical development, brain growth continues into the early 20s. The frontal lobe development is important during this stage. The frontal lobe is responsible for judgment, impulse, control, and planning, which is one of the last things to develop, which is why you see a lot of adolescents engaging in risk-taking behaviors and having emotional outbursts. Teenage thinking is characterized by the ability to reason logically and solve hypothetical problems, like designing, planning, and building a structure. Theory of mind is the ability to take the perspective of others and feel concern for others. If you know adolescents, as they get a little bit older, that usually comes into play, and it's an important part of social problem solving and conflict avoidance. So being able to think about how somebody else might be feeling and not just how you're feeling. Psychosocial development of adolescents. Who am I? Who do I want to be? Initially, they may adopt values and roles of their parents. And then they start to identify more with peers. According to Erickson, adolescents are in the identity versus role confusion stage. Teens may experiment while they figure out their identity, so that's a normal stage of development. The parent-child relationship are a lot of times associated with better grades, fewer school behavior problems during adolescence. Emerging adulthood is from 18 to 20. Identity exploration is focused on work and love. Why do we think that people are taking longer to grow up? Probably Western culture and just the current times of our culture. Also, people are living longer. It also seems to be the last few decades, at least, that higher levels of education are required in order to have a career. And I think just culturally, we're placing more importance on figuring out what you really want to do. Adulthood, the physical development, are at their peak in 20s to 40-year range, which is early adulthood. From 40s to 60s, there starts to be a physical decline. The skin loses elasticity, which is why we have wrinkles. Visual acuity decreases. Women experience menopause. Both men and women tend to gain weight and also start to lose their hair, and their hair turns gray. Late adult, 60s and up, skin continues to lose elasticity. Reaction time slows further. Muscle strength diminishes. Smell, taste, hearing, and vision all decline. Things that can help with all of those things are proper exercise, nutrition, and an active lifestyle. Cognitive development remains steady throughout early and middle adulthood. Crystallized intelligence remains steady and can even improve. And this is all of the knowledge that's been gathered throughout their life. Fluid intelligence, which includes processing abilities, reasoning, and memory, begin to decline. Some things that can help with fluid intelligence are playing mahjong, chess, other games that keep you mentally fit and delay cognitive decline. Reading and completing crossword puzzles are also good to keep your mind active. Psychosocial development of adults. Theorists believe that as we age, we need to continue to have meaning in our lives. So employment and well-being, job satisfaction is closely tied to work that involves contact with other people, work that's interesting, work that provides opportunity for advancement, and also allows some independence. Relationships, having a stable marriage, having children that you're involved with can all help with the psychosocial development. Socio-emotional selectivity theory is that as we get older, our social support and friendships dwindle in number, but remain as close, if not more close than in our earlier years. So they dwindle in number because as you get older, you do lose people that pass away, but they're very important still, and the quantity isn't as important as the quality. Death and dying, culture and individual backgrounds influence how we view death. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you don't necessarily go through these in that order, and you can go back to any of these at any time. So there's not a right way to grieve. But these are a lot of the stages that you will go through with grief. Different cultures, societies, and religions have varying practices surrounding death. For example, people's bodies might be buried in a cemetery, could be cremated, buried at sea or somewhere else. Cremated in a Hindu ceremony in Bali is another example here in this sea. But also many people cremate and they spread the ashes in places that their loved one felt the most comfort in or had special meaning to the family. So there's not a right way. There's different cultural significance to what people do as somebody they love has passed away. See you next chapter.